Hi, fifth graders. This is Miss Adams here. Today in reading, this is going to be our goal or our I can statement. I can analyze the visual elements or the ways the author/illustrator writes the text in a graphic novel to gather clues about the meaning. So yesterday we started reading Stargazing by Jen Wang, and we looked at the layout of graphic novels, and we learned all about the different terms that go along with the layout of a graphic novel. We talked about bleed, we talked about background and midground, and we also talked about panel and frame and graphic weight. Those are just some examples of the layout terms that we learned yesterday. We use those layout terms in order to describe what is happening in our graphic novel. And today we're going to be doing something very similar. But instead of using layout to describe what is happening in our graphic novel, we are going to use text features. So today, I want to teach you that readers analyze the types of visual elements in graphic novels. One way that we do this is by noticing the author's or illustrator's choices with the ways that the text is written. Readers look at text to help them understand and explain the meaning of the story. So for example, here is our anchor chart that we're going to be working with today. This will be posted on eClass for you, so that way you can go back and have a reference. Let's take a look at an example. So here we have a few pages from our book, Stargazing. External dialogue is a type of text. External dialogue is speech between characters, and unassigned dialogue means there's no character there in the panel, but their speech bubble is there. So for example, if we look right here, this is an unassigned dialogue. We have our speech bubble coming off of the panel and our character is not within that panel. So that means it's unassigned dialogue. There's no character in the panel. But we do have speech between characters where they are talking to each other within the panels. Another form of text is speech balloons and bubbles, right? There is enclosed dialogue where our character may be talking or speaking. It comes from a specific speaker's mouth, and they come in lots of different shapes. So for example, we could have a thought bubble. We could also have a jagged or ridgy speech bubble, a very smooth one, one that is also sharp. These different speech bubbles, remember we talked about how different shapes of speech bubbles can also show us how a character is trying to say something or how a character is feeling. So it's important to look at those speech balloons or bubbles and also look at the shapes that they are in. We also have some internal dialogue. That is a thought enclosed by a balloon that has a series of dots or bubbles going up to it, right? So when we have the little dots right here along with a bubble, for example, this one, this is where she's thinking, right? This is a thought enclosed in a balloon. So this is not dialogue spoken out loud, but this is showing us that these are things that are going on in her head. We also have captions. Captions can contain a setting. They could contain a time. For example, right here, this says later, right? That is describing a time, right? It is later. So it could also be a scene description, or it could be internal dialogue. You could have captions that represent any of those things. We also have special effects lettering, like onomatopoeias, wow, or bang. And we also have music. So for example, in this panel right here, we see a bunch of different music coming from the laptop. So that is special effect lettering. Let's go ahead and take a look at these three panels from a page in our book, Stargazing. What I'm going to do is describe to you what is happening here based on the text that I see. And then I'm going to make sure that I write that down. So that way, when I go back and look at the explanation of what's happening in these three panels, I'm able to tell someone. So the first thing I notice is that in this scene, the conversation is between characters As you see, the speech balloons are pointing to specific characters. So we see here that we have Miss Lynn, Moon's mother, and this speech bubble is pointing directly to her. Here we have Christine, and this speech bubble is pointing directly to her. Christine's father, say hello. And then we have Vivian and Christine. Hello, Miss Lynn. So notice how I use that vocabulary, speech balloons. Whenever you are trying to describe what is happening in a graphic novel to someone, or you're trying to write down that description, you need to make sure that you use the vocabulary terms that go along with the text in the graphic novel. So for example, I used speech balloon. That is one of the terms that we just went over with in that anchor chart. So let me explain. In this scene, the conversation is between characters. As you see, the speech balloons are pointing to specific characters that I had just pointed out to you. In panel 1, you hear Miss Lynn greeting Christine and her sister for the first time using external dialogue. There's another vocabulary word, external dialogue, right? I know that this text is external dialogue because of the way that the speech bubble is pointing to her and how she is saying this aloud. Oh, hello, girls. In the second panel, Christine shows that she is having internal dialogue, right? She's not actually saying out loud, ... She's kind of thinking and processing here, right? So what is she thinking? What is she processing? Well, I know that on the previous page of the story, Christine is afraid of meeting her neighbors, right? Because she has heard bad things about the daughter, Moon. Her friend at the very beginning of the story in chapter 1 told her that Moon beats people up. So I can see why Christine is kind of thinking to herself for a moment here. So in this part, she's probably confused because the mom is so nice and Christine wasn't expecting that, right? So this is internal dialogue that Christine is having. In panel 3, you see the dad prompting his daughters to say hello in more examples of external dialogue and having that conversation with each other. So guys, I just explained to you what was happening in these 3 panels on this page by using those text terms that we just talked about in our anchor chart. So now that I've explained it to you verbally, I want you to see how I wrote that down. I said, in this scene, the conversation is between characters. As you see, the speech balloons are pointing to specific characters. I bolded my I bold my term here, my term that I was talking about, speech balloons. That is a term that was in our anchor chart. So I bolded that. In panel 1, you hear Miss Lynn greeting Christine and her sister for the first time using external dialogue, meaning they're talking to each other. In the second panel, Christine shows she is having internal dialogue. On the previous page of the story, Christine is afraid of meeting her neighbors because she has heard bad things about the daughter, Moon. So in this part, she is probably confused as the mom is so nice and Christine wasn't expecting that. In panel 3, you see the dad prompting his daughters to say hello in more examples of external dialogue. So do you see here how I had just explained to you what was going on within those 3 panels out loud using that vocabulary from our text anchor chart? I now wrote that down. I'm going to ask you to do the same with this page from Stargazing using these 3 panels. I want you to use vocabulary from the text anchor chart and describe to me what is going on. Think about it to yourself first before you start writing, just like I did. You can think out loud or you can think in your head. I want you to think, what is going on here? Read each panel and then think about some of the vocabulary words or terms that you have seen from our text anchor chart. Do you see speech bubbles or balloons? Do you see internal dialogue or captions? Do you see special effects or lettering? Do you see external dialogue? Think of those things that you see. Think about specifics. Do you see any Speech between characters. Do you see any unassigned dialogue? Are you seeing enclosed dialogue? Are you seeing any speech balloons or bubbles that come in different shapes or forms? I want you to ask yourself those questions. Think about what's happening. And then I want you to write that down. You can choose to write that down in your reader's notebook, or you can choose to head to the discussion post and type your answer there. If you choose to write it down in your reader's notebook, I want you to make sure that you create a video note or take a picture of your work and post it into the same discussion post as well. Thank you, fifth graders, for hanging out with me today and for following along with me.